Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. It's an important topic that you are all working on. And I'd like to, because I do come out of technology for the last 30 years, give you at least my observations as to how did the government belly flop on the president's most important signature piece of legislation during his tenure. And of course, we don't really know all the details, and there'll be a lot of investigations and a lot of finger pointing. But let me give you at least my observations. Healthcare is our largest single economy inside of the U.S. GDP. It's about 18% of our GDP. It's expected to grow to 20% of our GDP by 2020. And our spend on healthcare on a per capita basis is about double anybody else in the world. And it's pretty easy to understand why it's hard to introduce ideas that may be inspired by European socialism in our country, because you can't take a European social model and add to it what makes us different than Europe, which is the power of special interests. If you look at our healthcare spend, it is probably double everyone else in the world because of all the deals that have to be cut with all the different special interests to be able to get any kind of legislation passed, regardless of whether you're a Democratic or a Republican point of view. So now think back to what the government was trying to accomplish. What they were trying to accomplish was to attract the young people who were needed to pay for the system to come to the healthcare.gov and sign up for it to subsidize the older people who are mostly better voters than the young people, and therefore important from a political standpoint and from a health standpoint, and the aging baby bubble, all of the obvious reasons why an older population is so important in a healthcare system. But they got to get the young people to sign up for it. And so the idea was, well, let's make this website really attractive for the young people. Nothing wrong with that idea. But they said, we can't really tell them how expensive it is. So let's get them to sign up for it first. And in order to get them to sign up for it, they had to get them authenticated that they are who they say they are. Medicaid has about 20% fraud, as you know. And they had to be able to verify what their income was. And when you're dealing in a system, healthcare system, where there are so many special interests and so many different organizations involved, the problem wasn't making the website work. That's pretty easy. Even the 55 contractors that they had engaged at close to $1 billion had the skills to be able to make a website work. The hard part was, how do you get all that back office stuff to work? How do you get different organizations that have never talked with each other before to suddenly share information? And how do you get it to work with in a way that you can solve that problem first, that you can get people authenticated and know what their income is before you allow them to even explore what's on the site. So somebody made a decision. Didn't seem like a technical decision, but it turned out to have an incredible impact on technology, which was, we can't show them how expensive healthcare is going to be, particularly those young people who don't really need it, until we get them verified and authenticated and registered, because if we do, they probably won't want to sign up for the health care. So the way the government thinks about things is usually in terms of budgets. The way we in the private sector think about things is in terms of customers. So everything we do, let's say at Apple, was about the customer. What's the customer's experience? And we would say, if it doesn't contribute to the customer, why are we spending that money? Now think about the way the government spends the money. Do they say, we don't spend the money unless it's going to add value to the citizen? who's the customer, or do they say, how do we get this to have enough political support that we can get it, navigate it through the system? And in many cases, you have to pay attention to what the special interests are, and you focus on budgets. So I was giving a speech recently to a group of CIOs in Washington, and their focus was on the budget. Their incentive was to spend everything they had before the end of the year, because if they didn't, then the money was used up and they wouldn't get an increase the following year. In the private sector, it's just the reverse. You spend the money, you're accountable, you focus on what it does for the customer, and if it works, you may get more money the next year. If it doesn't work, you probably won't. So that's just one observation on healthcare.gov. Here's what's really motivating me to be so involved in healthcare. I'm involved with 4 healthcare companies, several of them right here in Florida. And if we look back at the end of the Second World War, 2 important things happened for the returning GIs. One was the GI Bill that shaped our entire middle class, educated soldiers coming home. The other was the creation of a benefit to employees, which was a tax-free benefit for health insurance, and it continues to this day. In fact, our entire healthcare system in the U.S. is organized around employer-based healthcare plans. That is up until the Affordable Care Act became law. And then we had a parallel universe of another healthcare system. The old one didn't go away, but a new healthcare system that came up called the Affordable Care Act. And that was an entitlement system with a series of mandates. So you had one system that has been serving most of the people in the United States since the end of the Second World War, tax-free benefit from employers. You have another system that is coming up. And the really interesting thing is, what are the derivative effects as those 2 systems, they're both law, those 2 systems coexist? Well, one of the big effects is that the employers are racing to turn into self-insured employers, which means that they have a healthier population than the general population, and they can do things that the politicians don't want to touch. If you are fat, and we know the country suffers from obesity, no politician is going to penalize you for being overweight. If you are an employee in a self-insured employer organization, the employers will say, well, we'll give you some incentives if you'll lose weight, go to the fitness center, work out. We'll reduce the cost of your insurance, but if you don't, we're going to increase it. And so they can do things for smoking cessation, for alcohol abuse, for various things that politicians don't want to touch. And so they have a healthier population and they want to keep their costs down. They also have more control over their health plans because they can say, let's raise the deductibles. And we're all used to low copay. So we're used to every year the copay kicks in. We don't really pay much attention to what healthcare costs. That's no longer going to be true. The average deductible will be typically $5,000 a year. That means every year it's going to cost the average American who's employed in a self-insured employer company about $5,000 out of your own pocket before the copay kicks in. So what does that mean? Well, it means that consumers are consumers. They behave the way they would on anything else that they have to deal with in terms of making economic decisions. And they're going to suddenly say, well, gee, that's expensive. I don't know if I can afford it. Now, the government today is taking a lot of credit. They're saying, look, we're finally seeing, now that the Affordable Care Act has become law, we're finally seeing that the health care inflation is going down. And that's absolutely correct. But it doesn't mean it's cause and effect. Because we've gone back in and looked at studies that actually show that people are scared, and so they are postponing going to a doctor, postponing going to a dentist. It isn't that things are getting more affordable. It's that they're putting things off and saying, I can't afford to do that right now. On the other hand, we're seeing that there are good examples in healthcare where people are actually going out and making a choice. One of the most expensive parts of our healthcare system are the emergency departments in our hospitals. Many hospitals are going broke. There's a lot of consolidation going on. There's a new organization structure called ACOs, Accountable Care Organizations. They're starting to become larger and larger across the country, consolidating in hospitals, and we'll end up eventually with a healthier hospital system. But in the process of that, they're looking at things like the emergency department. And it can often be as expensive as several $1,000s for someone to go in for a simple procedure in an emergency department. And many people who don't have health insurance, they treat the emergency department in their hospital as their family practice doctor. So in the last decade, there is something called the walk-in urgent care clinic that's emerged. You can see them in every state. There are 9,000 of these walk-in urgent care centers around the United States, and we did a survey last year that showed that 24% of the population has been to a walk-in urgent care center at least twice in the last 12 months. Now, 24% of the population is the penetration of the Apple iPad. So you say, well, wait a minute, I've heard of the Apple iPad, but I can't think of any brand for a walk-in urgent care center. And the reason is, it's like our local dry cleaners. You know, there is no nationwide walk-in urgent care center brand yet. Now, some of us are old enough, I certainly am, to remember the world before we had Starbucks, before we had Walmart, before we had McDonald's, before we had ATM machines. It's only a matter of time till we start to see a lot of private sector solutions that'll be services, that'll be branded for consumer choice, that will be appealing to those people who are faced with high deductible plans, and they'll be less expensive than many of the things we have out there today, like emergency departments. So for example, and I'm not an investor in a walk-in urgent care clinic, so I'm not giving you a commercial on this, but what they've done is to take procedures, whether it's a physical or getting a wound stitched up, maybe it's checking for shortness of breath, whatever that happens to be, they've shrink-wrapped it. Just like Bill Gates invented shrink-wrap software, the walk-in urgent care centers have created what they call shrink-wrapped procedures, and they range from about $50 up to $300. Now, not $2,000 or $3,000 as the emergency departments, and you can walk in between 9 in the morning and 9 at night, and you can see a physician or a nurse practitioner, and it works pretty well. So that's just one example of the private sector coming up with a different, cheaper, faster, better way of dealing with things than they had been done in the past. So one of the big areas that I'm interested in is telehealth. Now, telehealth is based on the idea that you can take low acuity care. Low acuity are things like flu, sinusitis, earache, simple procedures that can actually be done online. You don't have to be face-to-face with doctors. In fact, CMS, that's the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, has estimated that up to 70% of face-to-face doctor visits, these are the low acuity care type visits, could be done remotely, meaning online. And now with the wide adoption of technologies like smartphones and tablets, no one has to go out and invent any new technology. It's already there. So yes, healthcare missed the PC, it missed the internet. It's not really missing the tablets and the smartphones because everybody's got them, including doctors who were always the last adopters of technology. And so what we're finding is that we can put together a network of certified doctors, rigorous training, rigorous credentialing of those doctors because you've got medical liability risks. Each state is different in terms of its regulatory issues. And then protocols that are not trying to match the alternatives in healthcare, but saying, why shouldn't we try to make it as good as the Genius Bar at Apple, the experience? You know, why are we comparing a new healthcare service with old healthcare services? Because people don't think they're very good. People don't like the idea that they have to wait 20 days on average to get a doctor's appointment, unless you're in Massachusetts, where you wait 45 days to get a doctor's appointment, which kind of gives you a clue as to maybe where we're headed, as the Affordable Care Act actually is fully deployed and you add 30 million more people to the population. Typical person sits in a waiting room for an hour beyond their appointed time, and the session time with their doctor is 7 to 11 minutes. And the experience is that people forget 80% of what the doctor tells them. So if you can do that online and you can start to have ways to keep records and integrate with your various doctors, and not just for low acuity care, but going into the highest spend of our healthcare system, which is chronic care. 5% of the population represents 50% of the healthcare spend. The majority of that healthcare spend is in the last 3 months of your life. We've invested a lot in this country into innovative medicine, but better medicine actually costs more money to the healthcare system, not less, because we keep people alive longer. So very little money has been invested into innovative ways to deliver healthcare services. And that's a place where the private sector actually has a chance to play an important role. My opinion is that the government could have gotten a lot further along with more innovation if it had focused on the consumer era of healthcare, much as we've seen the consumer era of technology that started with consumers but has found its way into the workplace with smartphones and tablets and things of that sort. If they had just thought about how do you create a tax environment that's attractive for entrepreneurs who want to take the risk to get into an industry that's filled with complexity, filled with regulations, filled with obstacles. And my sense is that with a little creative planning, I do a lot of work outside the United States in places that have something called flat tax, in places that have taxes that are 20% corporate tax. We're very active in Singapore, throughout the Eastern Europe. Many of these places which were, particularly Eastern Europe, stumbling economies, and yet they are growing very rapidly now with more attractive tax planning. So I'm not giving you the solutions. I'm just saying that here we have the single biggest industry in our economy, healthcare. It's getting bigger. There's a chance with technology, without having to invent anything. We don't have to invent a new kind of device. Just taking the ones that are working in all the other industries in our economy and begin to say, how do we adapt that to the kind of healthcare delivery services and bring innovation into the healthcare delivery services in a country that has been the world model for innovation? I mean, why can't it work in healthcare? Why can't we be just as innovative in healthcare? But it ain't going to happen in Washington when you've got special interests fighting with each other, politicians trying to outmaneuver one another. It's going to happen when you focus on the customer, the citizen, the patient, and realize that that's where the opportunities are. Thank you.